Go ahead, Katrina.
Alrighty.
Sorry,
No, alrighty.
go ahead.
Okay, so while we meet today on a virtual platform, we would like to acknowledge the traditional territories or ancestral lands of the Indigenous people. We would like to begin by acknowledging that the Indigenous people are the traditional stewards of all of the lands and waters where each of us attend from today. We acknowledge the many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit who have lived in and cared for these lands for generations. We are grateful for the traditional knowledge keepers and elders who are still with us today and those who have gone before us. We make this acknowledgement as an act of reconciliation and gratitude to those whose territories we reside on or are visiting. We want to reaffirm our commitment and responsibility in improving relationships between nations and to improving our own understandings of local Indigenous people and their culture. It is crucial that we acknowledge that stolen lands, forest removal, ethnic cleansing, and other harms of the past, and more importantly, that we reflect on what we do to work to move forward in partnership with Indigenous communities in the spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. Alrighty, so today's keynote is Katia, as we have here. We're really excited to hear everything that she has to say. She also is a fellow RILA camper. She attended in 2018, but in a different district. She was in the Vancouver Islands RILA conference, which is super cool. So it's really cool to hear about someone else who has participated in a RILA that's not her own and has been doing their own really big thing. And today she's here to talk to us all about, really the power of being a youth influence, that's not the word I'm trying to use, a leader. Thank you. This is why I have someone beside me. So without further ado, the floor is now yours. And if you need anything, just let us know.
Okay, awesome. Well, first I'm going to just try and set up my slides. I've embarrassed myself doing that before, just so you know, if it takes me a moment. And I decided to do slides because, everybody likes a pretty picture and it gives you something else to see other than me just nattering at you. So is the screen share allowed for me on the meeting?
Yeah, it should be on.
Okay, cool. Let me just hide all the other things that I've been working on this morning. Okay, whoops. I wish they had like elevator music for when people do this.
I still have the Olympic medal music somewhere.
All right, I think that worked. Let me see. Where'd my other thing go? Okay, there. All right, so what can you guys see right now?
We've got your slides presentation. We can see the whole Chrome window that you've got there, or Safari or whatever that is.
All right, and it fills the entire screen, just checking?
Yep.
Okay, good. You never know. And just checking that you can't see my little list of bullets that I have in my speaker notes.
Not
okay,
at all.
Awesome. That would be so embarrassing. And I don't know if anyone else has ever tried to use Google Slides to do like presentations before. You just can't seem to get the right configuration, but it's always a little bit vexing for me. But yeah, anyhow, I'm going to give to you my presentation, The Power of Passionate Youth Voices. A little bit about me, because you're probably wondering who I am. I'm Katia, and I use she, her pronouns. I describe myself as a British Columbian community organizer who also carries out a lot of environmental and climate justice advocacy work. Right now, I primarily work with the Cowichan Valley Earth Guardians crew, the Vote 16 BC campaign, and the Canadian Freshwater Alliance, as well as other various people-powered, action-centric organizations across the province and across our country. a couple quick facts about me to get started. I really love doing things that get my hands dirty. So I really love ecological restoration work, and I love using my passion for photography to document tangible actions that take place in my community. And I also love writing about my advocacy and community work on my blog. I recently just graduated high school, and this autumn I'm really looking forward to be heading to the University of Victoria on Vancouver Island to pursue a double major in environmental studies and geography for reasons that you're probably about to hear a lot about. Sorry. I've always really considered myself a lover of what we refer to as nature and the earth, just as many people do. I think that you'd find a hard time finding someone who says, I really hate the natural world. I really hate what the sky looks like when the sun is setting. I really hate seeing the trees and the forest moving in the wind. So it's a commonality that most of us have. I live on Thetis Island, just off the coast of British Columbia, one of the smallest inhabited Gulf islands in the Salish Sea. And living here has allowed me to develop these, what I would call really deep, intrinsic connections with ecology ever since I was born, probably. And living in the coastal Douglas fir rainforest and in this, like with the ocean in every direction around me. And having those be both my front doorstep and my playground and my backyard has really had a huge impact on me. And this has been accentuated by the fact that my mom is a well-known ethnobotanist, and she took me out into the field with her while I was still in the womb. And even when I was a baby, she'd put me in the baby backpack, as you can see here. I'm hiding in that little baby backpack in one of the pictures. But I get to go out into the field, and even before birth, I was allowed to soak in stories and soak in the natural world and hear teachings that elders and colleagues shared with my mom. And when I was a baby, I continued to join her as she worked. And as a child, I was able to come along adventures to special places. There's a picture of me there. I'm grinning ear to ear, and you can't really see it, but there's a little salmon fry in the plastic container that I'm holding. And I remember being there at the river that day. I can't remember everything about it, but I really remember I was just so happy to have this fish in my hands. It was awesome. But those things really stick with us, and they help us to build connections that even though I might not have tangible memories of, they still are something that I feel really deeply in my subconscious. And it has been shown by scientific study that interacting and spending time in nature provides like a host of benefits in all forms. It includes positive effects on physical health and psychological well-being, also cognitive ability, social cohesion. And beginning these interactions with nature in childhood has been proven to positively influence attitudes about ecology later on in life, triggering behaviors rooted in appreciation and conservation and environmental responsibility. And that's a responsibility that I continue to feel now, and one that for me catalyzed a shift from just doing the work to protect the environment and to help mitigate the impacts of climate change, but also work to mobilize my community and the people around me to take action as well. And I have experienced two events that have helped to catalyze this shift for me. The first was when I sought out an opportunity to do ecological restoration work. And you might ask what that is, so I'm happy to tell you. It can be a lot of things, but generally ecological restoration, regeneration, and remediation work is a way to improve the biological diversity of landscapes that are degraded, meaning that they have suffered a lot, usually at the hands of humans. It helps to increase the populations of native plant species and animal species, enhance and the connectivity of landscapes, how all the ecological biodiversity is fitting in together. And it contributes to the improvement of human well-being in the areas in which we undertake. It can be the form of planting native plant species near rivers to shade them for the benefit of the creatures that live in them and keep the river temperature lower and prevent soil erosion. And it can come in the form of rehabilitating grassy and garden areas by planting food and medicine plants, as well as plants that provide food for other species like pollinators. But it's more than just planting trees, right? It's about rejuvenating whole ecosystems and landscapes. And it's a very effective action to take to protect biodiversity, but also build community and mitigate the impacts of climate change. So anyway, the first catalyst I was talking about presented itself to me when I was just scrolling through Facebook. I'm not sure who else uses Facebook. I hear it's fading out with kids these days, but I still use it because there's some pretty helpful features like the events feature. And I saw a Facebook event when I was just scrolling and I was really interested. It was hosted by the Couch and Estuary Nature Center, and it talked about doing ecological restoration work and doing riparian planting in the estuary with native species like red osier dogwood and snowberry. And it seemed very in line with my interests, even though I probably didn't understand all of what was going on, but I was interested and I wanted to learn. And it seemed like a chance to really do something that was meaningful and hands-on, and I felt a pull towards it. So I signed up. And at that point, I was only 15 and I did not have a driver's license yet. So kindly, one of the organizers coordinated a ride for me. And they were kind enough to pick me up from 2 towns over and actually deliver me to the site that we were working on. And I really just remember how much fun that I had that day, getting dirty and mucky, sticking my hands into the clay saturated soil in the estuary, digging holes and planting riparian plants to strengthen the banks of the estuary, which have actually endured decades of anthropologic, ecological abuse. It used to be a historic railroad site and a prolific hub for logging exports. So there was trains and people, logs, all moving through that area, tearing up the ground, rerouting the river. But that day, in a place that had been so mistreated and so degraded, I was helping to carve out a space where life could return once again, a place where it could flourish and proliferate. And it really propelled me. I wanted to do even more of this kind of work. And so I did. Over the past few years, restoration has been a staple of how I spend my free time, and it will continue to be, because about a month ago, I returned to that very first site that I helped to plant. And you can see in the picture that the area is pretty muddy and there's only a few plants. But a month ago, it was so lush, it was so alive, and it was so vibrant, you could not even see the soil. And so to do this restoration work is actually to really breathe life and breathe resilience into the ecological networks that we depend on. And it's like so meaningful and such a heartfelt act to do. And it was doing that work, making the choice to see myself in teenagehood and help the intrinsic connections between people and place and ecology. Because even though I have this lifelong experience with ecology and with restoration work through my family, I believe self-determination and this self-chosen expression of our passions and values as we enter into youth is something critical as we continue to age and then enter adulthood. So with community in mind and importance of collaborative community action for ecological health, things were becoming clearer and clearer to me. And with those thoughts in my mind, I unwittingly sort of walked into the spider web of my second catalyst. On a cold day in March of 2019, I drove with some friends down to the legislature buildings located in Victoria, the capital of British Columbia, for a rally that was going to celebrate the first day of globally organized youth climate action that the world had ever seen. And going to that rally was another shift, right? There was thousands of people there. I live on a tiny island community. There's about 350 people that live here. I had never been in a crowd so huge. And I felt really small and kind of insignificant, but also a part of something that was really big. So I also felt kind of huge all at once. And at the rally, there was this urgency, the urgency of climate change happening now, having been accelerating for the past few hundreds of years because of humans. And in that moment, it felt like a huge call to action, a shift in the way that things were. And there was something about all those people who were strangers, but they were united for a safe future, looking forward and deciding how it could and should be, that really changed things for me. It was my first conscious run-in with the concept of community organizing work. And it was definitely not my last, because for the past few years, it's been something that I've been doing a lot of, formally and informally, paid and unpaid, in the Cowichan Valley, where I go to school and work, because my island community is so small that there's not a lot of work or volunteer opportunities where I live in the immediate, I don't know, 50-kilometer radius. But community organizer can mean a lot of things. It can mean online resource development for community volunteers who are interested in doing volunteer or advocacy work. And it can mean coordinating and organizing accessible, educational, engaging community events. It can mean documenting the tangible work going on in your community through blog writing, videography, photography. It can be presenting to local government officials. And it can mean striking or protesting or rallying in your community. And I've done all this and more in the past couple of years. I've been featured in Elle magazine for discussing how I kept youth-led climate activism alive in my community throughout a year of COVID. During that time, my organizing group helped to facilitate the painting of a community mural, did multiple social media engagement series, hosted community webinars and online discussions, helped to create a youth art zine, and many other socially distanced events that still allowed people to come together. And in that interview, I talked a lot about how people seem to think that we can't take effective change-making action during COVID-19 and the pandemic. And I really think that's untrue, because this pandemic is a test of our creativity and our resiliency. We not only have to hold on to the momentum that we've gained pre-pandemic, but we can also continue to gain momentum in new ways and organize in new ways, because we can't in the traditional ones. And I think that's something that's really special, right? Events like when I went to my RILA camp, it was in person. I got together with about, I want to say 40 other youth from Vancouver Island, and we met in person and we're together for a weekend. But that can't happen right now. So online events like this one are a crazy creative new way that we can do things. And they actually end up making things a lot more accessible for people, because people who wouldn't be able to get somewhere because of travel restrictions or whatever can now come together from the comfort of their own home. And I think that COVID, even though it's done so much harm, it's helped us to really realize that there is coming together and being apart. I've also discussed similar sort of things on CBC Radio with Matt Galloway. We talked about how the fight to protect the environment didn't end despite the pandemic temporarily putting a pause on some people's lives, and despite the attitudes of government and social perceptions, because that's another thing that's happening right now. right at the beginning of COVID, we noticed how governments were starting to ignore environmental protections and their necessity in favor of doing other actions. And of course, the COVID-19 pandemic is something that's serious and to be reckoned with, but so is climate change. We can't ignore one crisis for another, or we're just going to create a bigger problem on one side. I've also helped to get my local municipality declared a bee city. I just graduated this June, but in the past 2 years, I've been attending school in Duncan. And in that time, I've led my school's eco club. This past year, the QMS Eco Club took on a new initiative, getting our school declared a bee school. Bee City and Bee School designations are offered by Bee Cities Canada. And in order to get these designations, campuses and municipalities have to make yearly commitments to celebrating, protecting, and educating about pollinators. And after securing a designation for my school, my eco club started to think bigger. How could we get the city that we live in declared a bee city? So we got in touch with local mayor and councillors, put together a presentation, went to the city council, and our proposed motion to get Duncan declared a bee city was supported unanimously. The city of Duncan submitted their application to become a bee city, the very, very first on Vancouver Island. And hopefully more cities are going to take up the torch and become bee cities as well, because protecting our pollinators is so important. And I think it's just so awesome that our city council believed in intergenerational and interorganizational collaboration and was willing to approach integrating pollinator infrastructure into our city using a systems thinking approach and working with youth. I think that's an awesome example and innovative take on leadership. Another funny thing is I've actually been asked to run as a Green Party MP in the place that I live. And so you can see that I've done all these really cool things over the past little while, and it's not a brag, it's not supposed to be, but that's just where this community organizing work can take you. It can take you from speaking with really cool people, being in publications, to being asked to run as member of parliament, which is pretty crazy. And with that, you can go anywhere that you want to go. Community organizing and community work can mean and lead to a lot of things, but really at the very heart of it all, the definition of community organizing that I think never really changes is that community organizing work, as well as activism or advocacy work or whatever you want to call it, is about raising your voice and speaking from the heart, speaking up about what really matters and mobilizing action from your community around that, building community around that. And it can be a bit easier said than done, but it's so worth it, especially for young people. And so I'm just going to pose a question. Who here has ever felt like they weren't taken seriously because of their age? Like their ideas were brushed off, like their voices didn't really matter? Can I get a show of hands? Yeah. It's something that's really hard to deal with. And the thing is that our social systems often try to diminish the contributions of youth to our society and silence youth voices. It can happen through ignoring youth voices that share uncomfortable truths or blindly believing stereotypes about youth. It can be disenfranchisement until adulthood and disregarding the interests and passions of youth because of their age. But it isn't always this way, and really it doesn't have to be this way at all, because in the minds and hearts and voices of young people, therein lies a passion that can change communities for the better. Youth are powerful conduits of change and really thoughtful stewards of the future, at least I would like to think. But it is young people who historically and currently have always helped to lead the charge for change. And again, believing that you are a powerful conduit of change or a thoughtful steward of the future can be so incredibly difficult when it feels like there is nothing and no one to affirm you in that. And when people tell you that what you're doing or saying is not worth your time or theirs. So I get it. I've been there. Since involving myself in community organizing work, I've done a lot of things that felt new, that felt unknown, that felt really foreign to me. And I spent a lot of time in spaces that were systematically designed to feel unwelcome to youth and to deter our input. But I spent a lot of time researching, working on, and really pouring my heart into projects only to have community leaders tell me that I didn't know what I was talking about and I couldn't back up what I was saying, or that what I was doing was essentially a waste of their time. The first ever time that I stood in front of my local council when I was a part of a delegation to get municipal government to declare a climate emergency, I was so nervous. I was sat there like just sweating in my seat, waiting for my chance to stand and speak. And when I read my little speech to the council, I felt a little bit shaky and like I needed to sit back down, but my voice was pretty full of conviction, or at least I'd like to think. And I was really proud of what I had said. But when the floor opened up for the councilors to speak, I felt like my heart was just doing backflips inside of my chest. A few of the counselors spoke in support of the motion and praised me for having the courage to come and speak to them as a youth that day. But others were pretty openly critical, saying that what I had said was too emotional and didn't grasp the seriousness of the request that I was making to declare a climate emergency. It's really not that hard. But still others just kind of seemed to dismiss me. And I did not feel welcome there. I felt either really tokenized as a youth voice or not taken seriously. And it felt really terrible, even though that I was really proud of what I had done and what I had said. So, oops. So I know that speaking up can be hard because I've been there. And especially when it's something that matters a lot to you, right? And knowing how to assert yourself in spaces that don't feel welcoming of your perspectives as a young person, or where there isn't willingness to listen, can be even harder. And then knowing even just where to begin or how to begin can kind of be the hardest of all. And I've been there, I've felt it, I've done it. I've really had to work at feeling like my voice as a youth was something that was powerful and something that was needed for a long time. And I'm here today to talk to you about how your voices as passionate young people are really powerful mechanisms for change. And I think it's kind of important that I, as a young person, am here today to give you this talk and not another adult. In this space, I'm your peer. The experiences that I share with you are still fresh for me. The solutions are new. The work is ongoing. It's evolving still. And I'm not here to give you a third person perspective as someone who's distanced from youth movements. I'm doing it right now, and I'm trying and I'm figuring out and I'm failing and I'm succeeding. And I'm trying to incite some really positive change and just earnestly share insights and tools so that you can do it too. Or if that you already feel like you are, so that navigating the barriers that passionate young people face can just maybe even be a little tiny bit easier for you. So welcome officially to the part of my talk where I tell you some really tangible things. Today, I just wanted to share first with you the power of youth voices and why they're so important. Then I want to share 5 tips and tools that will lend even more clarity and power to your voice and how exactly to use them. And we'll have some time for questions at the end. So first of all, before we learn anything about amplifying our voices as young people, from me, maybe you won't learn anything, but I'd like to think you will, and using them for change. Why are youth voices actually important, and what power do they actually hold? So before I move on to the presentation part, I want to, everybody to kind of discuss their own thoughts on these questions in breakout groups. So I think that we're going to get put into those group now. And we'll have like 20 minutes, hopefully, of really earnest, excited conversation to discuss the 3 questions on the slide. What do you think the power of youth voices is? Why do you think youth voices are valuable? And what is a time that you've raised your voice? And I will also pop them in the chat because I know what it's like to forget what you're supposed to be talking about in a breakout group. So I'll stop the share for now, and I guess we'll get put in our breakout groups.
So I've split you all up. Katrina, I put you in one just because you've got Chloe there with you. We've got 2 rooms of 4. Oh, hold on. We did. Somebody left. We have 1 room of 3. It's okay. We'll figure it out. And then Katia, because you are a co-host, I think you can jump in and out of both of them if you want to. So I'll start you in room 2 and then you can change to room 1 if you want.
Sounds
Oh,
good.
actually, Katie U is here, so I'm going to throw her in room 2 as well. Let me just add her. There we go. I'll just start the lady. Okay.
All right. So does anybody want to share any takeaways from their groups? You don't have to feel shy.
I definitely say that the breakout room I was in, we definitely all talked about different ways we could improve, how we can speak about our voices and what our ideas were for going to someone for help if we wanted to start speaking out, but we don't know how. And we definitely shared that schools can be a very big help, and like teachers can be a very big help when you're wanting to get started. And that we talked about like reaching out to organizations and finding people who have the same interests as you. And that we also had spoken a little bit about how youth voices are much easier for us to believe in and connect to and empower us than having to listen to a 40-year-old speak to us, along the lines of, if a youth were to speak to us, it could help us believe that even though they're young, even though we're young, we can still do it because they're doing it. Where a 40-year-old who's lived half their life can be a little harder to be inspired by.
Yeah, totally. Does anyone from the other group want to share?
We mostly talked about, well, basically the same thing, but in a different sense. What I said was, we're the generation after the generation of transition and change, where they have done a lot of the hard parts, a lot of the difficult parts in supporting the LGBTQ community, a lot of POC rights, Black rights, all that stuff. They've done a lot of the hard parts, and we are the generation that has to continue that change to develop it, to basically maintain it in a sustainable way.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you guys for sharing. I'm just going to start my screen share again and make sure it still works. All right. Is that full screen and looking good for everybody?
Yes, it's good.
Okay, awesome. There. All right, so now that we're all back and the sharing process is complete, which I popped in on both conversations, and I think that you guys talked about some really awesome stuff that's in line with what I'm about to articulate in a more formatted way, right? Because, obviously I worked on my presentation and I'm going to share some stuff with you, and it's probably in the direction of what you're thinking, but I've tried to package it up really nice so that it's digestible. But let's talk about the importance of youth voices. We as youth will be the workforce, the voters, the taxpayers, and the politicians of tomorrow, if we aren't already. And we live in an age of intersecting crises. We're worried about the issues that disproportionately affect youth and other marginalized people in our country, such as the opioid and overdose epidemics, the homelessness, particularly the rise of youth homelessness in Canada, LGBTQ plus rights, police brutality and systematic racism, COVID-19 pandemic and a green recovery from the pandemic, the affordability, housing and job crises, as well as climate change and environmental protection, how they're impacted by things like old growth logging and rising emissions. The list goes on, and it can be a little bit daunting sometimes, right? But this is the world that we're growing up in, and this is the one that we deserve to have a say in. I want my say, and I'm sure you guys do too. The decisions that are being made today will have deciding impacts on our future, and we should be a part of those decisions because the future, as of right now, is the one that we will be here the longest for. And really, allowing youth voices to have an input on the decisions that will remain relevant for generations to come and have lasting impacts is letting the future decide the future. And another important aspect of why youth input is essential is that without youth advocating for their perspectives to be heard, they are often left out, forgotten, or dismissed. And this really isn't acceptable. It's really not okay because youth have unique perspectives, unique needs, and unique ideas. And the reality is that youth are some of the most creative thinkers among us and the most willing to explore new ways of thinking. The cultural influence of teens is massive, and how our creativity and our urges for change have and will continue to shape our society is phenomenal. And I think that this only continues to become more and more true with the emergence of technology and the digital age, and how for one of the first times in human history, children are an authority on a topic that is changing commerce, changing government, and every other institution as a result of how rapidly our society and these technologies are evolving. And I think that youth have the power to be more impactful than ever before as a result of how technology is shaping our world. Through our creativity, teens are using technology to mobilize and incite change in new and I'd say pretty ingenious ways. And we see it every day. And I'd like to count myself and you guys among the ranks of youth who are doing this. I see how successful that technology is as connecting youth from across the globe and creating opportunities for us to collaborate and innovate. But despite this, teenage brains and the youth they belong to are rarely involved in decision-making processes, policy development, or social programming generation. Teenagers are often not taken seriously and are stereotyped frequently, and in many places, very few of them are included in the franchise. So while like the prefrontal cortex is not fully developed until the age of 25, the cold cognition skills that are actually used to make sound and informed voting decisions are fully developed even before the age of 16, despite the age of majority commonly being 18 or 19 or as old as 21. And the challenge that exists within this phenomenon is that the disenfranchisement and discreditation of the ideas and the voices of youth has these negative preconceived notions about the teenage brain and stereotypes about teenagers in general. But this challenge can be overcome through increased efforts to dismantle these pre-existing stereotypes and provide youth with opportunities to use their unique brains to show people how to shift the narrative and that youth can be a part of decision making. And herein lies the change that accompanies the obvious challenge of what stereotypes about the teenage brain may imply. Affording credit, rights, responsibilities, and opportunities to youth is the change that I am proposing. And I think that the passionate youth of today show a lot of evidence for. So in sum, it reminds us that it's important to acknowledge that adolescence is really, it's not a disease. Teenagers are an essential part of our society. We deserve a say, and our voices are powerful, even though it can kind of be hard to believe sometimes when it seems like almost everyone's telling you the opposite. And so with that, I'm going to share my tools and tips for you to build resilience to anyone and everyone who tells you that your perspectives as a youth don't matter. So I have 5 of these tips, and number 1 is don't let the oppressed become the oppressor. We already know as youth that we have to contend with systemic oppression as a body of people, both conscious and unconscious, dismiss and discredit from individual adults, but sometimes we also deal with it from other youth. And this is because of the social conditioning that has occurred to make young people believe that their voices aren't important. Through this kind of conditioning, young people sometimes learn to embrace the silencing of other youth. And so the oppressed, instead of striving for liberation, tend themselves to become the oppressors. So if you're a person who already does some form of community organizing work, whether it's volunteering, being a part of a school club, participating in an activity that you like about in your community, politics, sports, song, art, or dance, maybe you've noticed how sometimes other youth don't have those same inclinations to do community creative activities and think that their lack of inclination or interest is a good enough reason to try and detract from your passion. It can be delivered to you as a that's lame or that's stupid or why do you even care? But really it's an example of how youth freely adopt or conditioned to adopt a culture of youth silence and oppression and begin perpetuating that system themselves and start trying to silence their peers. But we really can't be letting this happen. And so we need to work to decondition ourselves and our peers, because silencing youth is a tool of oppression that denies young people their natural abilities and takes away from further developing their capabilities. So in order to stop the oppressed from becoming the oppressor, do what you're passionate about. Talk about it. Do it with a smile. Normalize that. Show your peers and yourself that being passionate about things and sharing your perspectives as a young person is cool and it is valuable. And we can only dismantle these systems of youth oppression if we get other youth to stand with us, dismantling these pre-existing stereotypes about youth and changing the narrative and setting a new precedent. And connected to this is being prepared for the naysayers who will say that sharing your voice as a youth isn't valuable or isn't important, as well as knowing how to respond to them in ways that can effectively give them the perspective just to not waste your time. So first of all, naysayers, they're gonna naysay. You can't stop them, but you can try and educate them and shift their perspectives if they seem willing enough to engage in a constructive conversation. And in doing this, you need to choose what points to make to illustrate to them that youth are passionate and deserving of a voice in society. So consider first, what points are you making to this person? Who are you making them to? Make sure your points align with your audience, but also remember to be open to listening to people who are trying to voice their concerns, however misguided they might be. Call out over generalizations and stereotypes and discrimination, whether they're related to youth or anyone else. However, when someone doesn't support uplifting or even hearing the voices of young people, it's important to, number one, know who to bother spending time on and don't waste your time on, and to not take abuse from people who are actively opposing you. Instead, learn to identify opponents who are a little bit more passive, as well as neutral parties that you might actually be able to have a chance with having a constructive conversation with. And two, you need to identify what points might resonate best with them and to give those a try. Three, you need to give concrete examples of how youth deserve a voice and youth who do deserve a voice, and make your conversation with that person one of those examples. Four, don't let the person you're speaking to badger you. If a conversation becomes too much, or if their conversational tactics are too aggressive, learn when to politely exit a conversation. And five, remember to stay cordial and polite with these people. Getting riled up and trying to relay your points in an angry conversation is an effective way to prove your point, and it actually might disprove it. And while you're out there in your community, having these conversations and making these connections, begin to try and build upon intergenerational relationships in your community. Intergenerational collaboration is people of all ages coming together to collectively think and listen, and then decide together how to act in a way that is best supporting their community. It's about making sure that every stakeholder and decision involving your community is invited to the table and given a chance to speak. It's also just a very useful and important tool for all of us, regardless of who we are, to have in our toolboxes. Intergenerational collaboration speaks to so much. It speaks to me and my lived experience, because as a young person, I have not always been invited to the decision-making table or even considered a stakeholder in decisions that really seem to involve me, or at least youth and our future. In both decision-making and at large dinner tables with extended family, there's a little kids table. And it's one that people have often tried to shunt me and other youth to, but that's not an example of intergenerational collaboration. Intergenerational collaboration is building connections between the wisdom of support and elders and the ideas and passions of youth. In my life, it's become really evident in my community organizing work. We need to have stakeholders from all different generations, as unscientific and unspecified as that particular term may be. People diverse in age, really, to have comprehensive and creative solutions to problems that stem from climate-related impacts or anything else, through sharing perspectives and then creating ideas that are collaborative and multidimensional. Ideas that are formed in this way with input from everyone are so much stronger than ones that are formed by small homogeneous groups or individuals. And using the structure of diverse intergenerational collaboration to pave a pathway forward, one away from anthropogenic climate change and anything else that's going to cause ecological and societal collapse. So intergenerational collaboration is beginning to develop a more holistic, more collaborative, and more longevitive sense of community. It allows for an essential transference of intergenerational knowledge and stems from the values between youth and their elders, and strengthen relationships between a past and a future to inform decision making. And in addition, older allies can be immeasurably useful resources of support and guidance and wisdom that we as youth can use to amplify our voices. And they themselves are often people who want to amplify our voices, the voices of our future. But while allies are valuable, useful, and appreciated greatly, it's also essential for us as youth to be self-advocates for when we don't have allies, and for when there's no one to help us advocate for ourselves. So my fourth tool tip is to learn how to be a self-advocate and how to create space for yourself to speak, even when it doesn't really feel like there is. Because sometimes there won't be a space for you to share your voice as a youth, even though you might be a stakeholder in a conversation or a decision, and even if you really want to. And that's not really okay. And yes, I know it shouldn't be like that, but it sometimes will be. And that's why you're going to have to learn to be a self-advocate, because in a lot of these situations where a lack of youth voice is prevalent, the keepers of those spaces will either not understand why youth are important in this context, or they're not going to care, unfortunately. And sometimes you won't even be invited to the table. And if you are, it might not be an authentic invitation. And this is called the use of the youth checkbox. And the term youth checkbox is referring to a phenomenon that is detrimental to creating intergenerational collaboration and also having authentic youth input. The youth checkbox on the organizer's list of tokens for inclusivity and posterity is really harmful. And while being aware of the spaces that we occupy and who we occupy them with, while still trying to bring up the perspectives of those who are not present, we do not want to turn into people's tokens or checkboxes. Youth can't just be in a space because they're a checkbox on that posterity list. They need to actually be included and have that inclusion manifest in real, visible, and tangible ways. And further, even if a young person receives genuine invitation, there are going to be systematic barriers that prevent them from accepting it. When youth are invited into spaces, that invitation has to be inclusive to young people, not just the invitation itself, but how to accept it. Sometimes, even when youth have opportunities to be included and empowered, these opportunities are not always made viable or possible, and that doesn't make inclusion accessible. So, for example, a young person could be invited to speak at an event or a conference much like this, but it could be an event that was held during the school day, making it an accessible opportunity for empowerment. And so the youth checkbox is something that we need to be standing up against, is something that we need to be fighting against. But how do you do that? How do you fight back against these harmful attitudes and discriminatory actions, whether they're intended to be or not? And it's hard, but you have to be willing and able to stand up and to assert yourself and your voice as a young person. This could mean a lot of things. It could mean petitioning local councils and committees to have youth positions. It could mean pestering people for a chance to present at a meeting of an organization that they're a part of. It could mean hosting sit-ins or strikes or protests in your community to draw attention to issues that impact youth and your lack of say. It could mean a lot of things, and it's really, as far as your imagination goes, right? So get creative with it. And your creativity is going to be one of the greatest assets in sharing your voice as a young person, which leads me to your fifth and final tip that I have for you. Connect the issues that you care about with your passions and your skills. Your creativity is an asset. So is your love of dancing, or your computer software skills, or how passionate you are about writing, or even how good you are at making friends. We all have passions and skills that we love and that we're proud of and we want to showcase, and they're just big parts of our lives. And in our work to uplift youth voices, we use them. Using our passions as a tool for change makes our change-making potential deepen and lets us to have more fun with it, right? Which is often it comes back around to deepen the impact again. I mean, think about it. Is it easier to do something that you love and are passionate about, or something that you find unstimulating, tedious, and mundane? And I think that's probably a pretty redundant question and that you already know the answer. So I will tell you this. If you have a love of dancing and you're concerned about oil pipelines snaking their way through your community, try getting into public performance art and raise awareness by creating a choreography for a piece that you can perform. Or if you're a computer whiz who cares about climate change, create graphics or websites or toolkits or any other kind of resource to share. And if writing is your thing and you are concerned about overfishing, maybe write blog posts and letters to your local government or your local paper and try to get the message out there. Or if you're just one of those people who makes friends everywhere you go, then use that. Help to onboard volunteers for local community groups, or make connections with fellow community members about what's going on in your community. So I just came up with those examples, and maybe you aren't the dancer who cares about oil pipelines, but you are the someone who cares about something. And any skill that you have, any passion that you have, it can be applied to uplift your voice as a young person in ways that you actually get excited about. I know this because it's something that I employ in my own volunteer and community work. So it comes back to me, but it's so that I can prove it to you, right? I love writing. It's one of my favorite things to do, always has been. And so I use my writing to create change. Even just a small amount on my own blog called Sowing Seeds of Change. And I also love photography, and I use that passion to document the important volunteer community advocacy work that's done in my community. It's important that people see this stuff and that people connect with this stuff and that people get interested in creating change. And so using our passions to illustrate the need for change is something that we can easily do. It's something that people can easily connect to. And that's really our power as young people. New and creative ways of thinking, being, and doing that are going to help forge a way forward into a better future. But first, we need to learn how to stand up, stand tall, and show the world that we can do it. And that's my presentation for you guys. You can ask me questions if you like. I think we have like 10 more minutes. I hope you learned something. I hope that, I don't know, at least the pictures were bright and interesting. I really do hope you enjoyed yourself. But yeah, if that's all right, we can do questions. Okay, cool.
Thank you so much for speaking. That was awesome. Throughout your presentation, you answered a bunch of the questions that were already on Whova, but there is one that kind of links to another one. So someone asked, were you ever involved in a program or an organization that promoted public speaking, or did you learn as you went?
Okay, so this will be a funny story, okay? The very first time I was ever asked to do public speaking was for this Leaders of Tomorrow event that happens every year in my community, where youth from different age groups are able to come and share about the volunteer work that they do. And there's like a winner every year, but you win money to donate to an organization of your choice, and the winner's name comes out of a hat. So it's just a draw, but it's a really fun way for youth get to support organizations that they really believe in and care about. And as a past entrant at this event, I had been asked to do a speech for the new people that were coming and had their names in the hat, and one of them was going to be the winner. And I went up on stage, I wrote out my little script. I think I was 12, and I got up there, I just froze. And then I started thinking, oh no, it's okay, you could like do this. But then too much time had passed, and I just hadn't said anything, and I'd stayed there frozen for maybe a minute. And then I got so scared, and I will be honest, I ran off the stage and I hid in the bathroom. So it's definitely not something that I've had with me this whole entire time. It's something that I've had to build up a lot too. And it's actually easier for me to speak online because I know I can be comfortable in my own space and feel better in that way. But when I'm in a group of people, a large group still, I still get a little bit like, I have to talk to all these people and there's no hiding. I'm in a place that's maybe not comfortable for me and I have to interact with everyone and there's no backing out now. But yeah, it really just takes practice and doing it over and over again, and just even using the conversations that you have with people as practice of your public speaking skills, trying to formulate your sentences and use the words that you really think prove your point in your conversations with people, and trying to get away from like and the blank look on your face when you start to not remember what you're going to say. And yeah, it's just using every opportunity as a chance to practice and a chance to feel more confident in yourself and your voice. Because 2 years later, after I ran off that stage, I went back to the same event and I actually was the speaker there again. And that time I did not run off the stage because I was scared. And so, like, these opportunities often come full circle, right? Even if you feel like, oh no, I messed up so much the first time you try something, you can try again. And in the meantime, you can practice. And practice makes perfect, or close to it. And when you are able to practice, you're going to feel better. You're going to feel more confident, which is going to allow you to succeed.
In regard to public speaking, so even I had, like, when I was young, I had the same problem, but then I joined the Toastmasters, and so you have to speak every week in front of an audience. So that helped me build off my public speaking skills and, you know, get rid of that stage fright. I just started letting everyone know that, like, it's like joining Toastmasters can help.
I'm sorry, I couldn't quite hear all of that. You cut out a little bit for me.
I think he was talking about how joining Toastmasters helped him with his public speaking, which is also really cool because Toastmasters and Rotary recently have formed a partnership. So there's a lot of back and forth between the two organizations.
Oh, neat. Well, I'm so happy that you have a chance to practice. It really feels good, at least I think.
It looks like we have another question. It is, what is your favorite part about restoration and being a leader and an inspiration to young people?
I think that's 3 questions. My favorite part about doing restoration work is, oh, that's hard, but it's something that just about anybody can do if their body is going to allow them. And there's like a really diverse range spectrum for people of all abilities to participate in it. But really just like, you get your hands dirty, you're kneeling in the dirt, you're taking the plant, you're putting it in the ground. It's more complicated than that. You're not just planting a homogeneous sort of species set of trees. You're really looking to integrate what you're doing into the landscape, provide ecological function, provide habitat for different species. But for me, it's just something that's so tangible, so visible, and so inclusive. And I think that's what we should strive for in a lot of different facets of the work that we do. That it should be something that people can look at and, number one, say, wow, like something just happened here. And it should be something that people can participate in. And that's huge, right? Because when people see really interesting, important work going on, but they don't see themselves, either because of physical need or mental emotional need, or just not having enough confidence in themselves, and they can't do it, whether it's like a physical barrier or a barrier that they're just self-imposing, that can be really hard. It can be hard to see something and want to take part in it, but not feel like you can. And so that's why I really love restoration, because it is one of those things that you can do when you see it happen. There's a change that has been made right away and you feel so good about it. And my favorite part about being a leader and inspiration to young people, I think of myself more as a peer. I have some of my more negative experiences so that other people don't have to. And my favorite part about doing the work that I do is making these connections. I'm so excited that I could be here with you guys today. And I think it's so neat because I went to my own Ryla camp in 2018. And it's really great to see those connections come alive in ways like this, because I'm not actually your neighbor. I don't live very close to any of you guys at all. I live across the country, but still I'm able to join you here today and to share a little bit about the things that I do and make connections and really enjoy hearing your perspectives. And yeah, I think that's my favorite thing.
Oh, oops. Is there anything you can talk about like the personal connections with like people you have made throughout all your journeys and work?
Personal connections that like lead to friendships or
Yeah.
lead to tangible things? Yeah, okay, totally. One example is a girl that I met online. I won't share her name just because, you know, other people's privacy, but I just saw one of her. Are you guys familiar with the Fridays for Future digital strike where people hold up signs and they take a picture and post it on Instagram? Okay, looks like there's some degree of familiarity. So I found one of her signs shared on one of my previous friends' stories and I thought, wow, that looks so cool. And I scrolled through her profile. She did some pretty amazing artwork. So I gave her a follow and then we followed each other for a little while. And then I made a post, something about visioning for our communities with our communities. And she really liked the post that I wrote, which made me feel pretty good. But then she commented later on my post, a couple weeks later, she said, hey, I'm starting a podcast and I'd actually like to have you on my podcast talking about this community visioning that you mentioned in this post that you've made. And I thought, wow, that's so cool. Because this girl, I hadn't known her prior to following her on Instagram. And she actually lives in the US, very far away from me. And even though that we're so far away from each other, and we live totally different lives, we were able to make a connection on something that we both cared about. And then getting together, we got on a Zoom call. She she recorded the audio for her podcast and then created it later. Even though that we lived so far away, we were able to come together and create something and to show that, like, some of the connections and the creations are a little bit more intangible. Like we're all here in this room today and we've created a connection and you can't see it. It's not visible, but it is here and it's still special. But when we're able to create things that are really tangible, really visible, that's something that people can listen to or look at, that's really exciting in my mind because something has physically been created from a less than physical space. And a friendship was created too. And it's so great to have those connections and to be able to meet new and exciting people and find parallels in the work that you do and the work that they do, find inspiration and learn things. There's just so much that can come out of a singular interaction, right? And that makes me so excited.
I have another question for you. Yeah, this is like kind of general, I guess. You talked about how you use writing to kind of, talk about your passions. And yeah, I'm also pretty interested in writing myself. And yeah, I'm also passionate about the environment mostly, like as a cause. So yeah, I'm just kind of want some like tips, I guess, for like connecting with readers about a certain issue through writing specifically. yeah, I guess, yeah, I might be getting published on like my company, yeah, WWF website like early this week. And yeah, I want to, keep doing writing, obviously. So yeah, like tips for kind of connecting. And yeah.
Okay, yeah, totally. And that sounds really exciting, and I'm really happy for you. But I think you really actually, in your question, touched on the answer that I would give you. And the answer is to tell a story that people can see themselves in and in that way connect to, right? I write most of the time from first person, and I really enjoy employing writing tools that help to create an artistic narrative that draws people in a way that they can see themselves in taking the action or seeing the issue that you are describing to them. An example is I work for the Canadian Freshwater Alliance. Something that I've been documenting in the past little while is salmon fry rescue. And if you aren't familiar with it, salmon fry rescue is when people actually go to the little tributaries that eke off of lakes or rivers, and those tributaries have dried up into puddles because of heat waves and droughts and stemming from climate change. But those volunteers who go out with their buckets and they have to finagle the fish into the buckets and scoop them. It's really difficult, and it's kind of funny to watch, to be quite honest. But they scoop up the fish and they save them, and then they take them to a safer body of water. That's a story that I've had to tell in the recent couple of weeks. But what you really need to do there, I think, is to show people that that's something that they can connect to, that they have a reason to care about it because it's about the me, the here, and the now, and that they can connect to it. So I tried to tell that story as a person who was going to this event, who was participating in this event, who found such reward and satisfaction in doing it, and that other people could as well. It's one of those, again, really hands-on, really tangible things that creates an image. Like, if you think about it, boil it down to the very basics, people are actually having to move fish from their natural habitat because human-caused climate change has made those spaces inhospitable to the fish. They have to move the fish from where they're supposed to be in order to survive. That's really, really crazy. So, but it's something that you can see so viscerally, right? You shouldn't have to move the fish, but yet we do. And there's people who are doing that really incredible work. So really connecting it back to people's communities and the issues that are impacting them, I think is so important, that me here and now, because some people immediately they can connect to the issues that you care about because of your shared interests and shared values. But other people, they think, what does that have to do with me? Why should I care about it? And you need to like prove that to them in your writing. So I hope that was maybe a little helpful.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you so much for coming with us today. I know, different time zones and everything. So it really meant a lot for us to see like a fellow, oh my goodness, I have no words, a fellow youth activist who also was involved with RILA come and speak to us about how you've really done your changes. If anyone has a question, you can always throw them in the Whova app, just because we want to let her go. She's given us her time. So thank you so much for everything that you did, and your presentation was wonderful.
Totally. And also because I don't know how often I will check the Whova app, particularly after the conference itself, is that what we're calling it? Itself is fully over. You can also find me on Instagram at Katia Bannister, just my name, if you ever want to talk to me sometime in the future. I also post some cool stuff, at least I'd like to think, about things that you can pursue in your community and issues that we are needing to stand up against. So yeah, that's another way to connect with me, just because I wouldn't want to accidentally ignore anybody.
her Instagram is pretty sick. I gave it a follow, so
Thank you.
check it out. Alrighty, folks.